Hey everyone, how's it going? We got an interview. I got an interview with an old podcaster friend that I used to do a show a couple of years ago with. I haven't been on in a while, but she absolutely kills it. She does um, this kind of like four horsemen thing with a couple of people that I used to do podcasts with, and I'm gonna have her on because we're gonna talk about past lives, and I'm just really excited to start getting into this kind of stuff. So I'm gonna bring her on. Hi, Lindsay.
Hi, Micah.
How are you?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
Wonderful. Thanks for agreeing to come on.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yes. So I saw first and foremost, I get your newsletters that you email out, and I absolutely love them. I think they're great. They're uplifting. They're inspirational. I think they're wonderful.
Are you talking about my Substack?
Yeah,
Yeah.
whatever gets emailed to me because I think I'm on like a mailing list or
Well,
something.
I have two. So I have my Substack. It's rogueways.substack.com. So if you're on that, if you're subscribed to it, it sends you emails. But I also do have an email list of my own that every once in a while I send something out. But I'm pretty sure you're referring to the Substack.
Yeah. So I saw that you were talking about past lives recently, and that really interests me. So my first question about past lives is, I mean, we all have them accessed. We just, in the Akashic records or so, all the information is there. And what really interests me are the people who like, and you always find it with like a brain injury, right? Like someone falls down the flight of stairs and bangs their head, and they wake up and they can speak Egyptian and they remember their past lives. Um, I was just wondering, where does this whole thing start from? Like, how did you get involved into this? How did you get interested in this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've actually never heard of a past life access from a brain injury, but I believe it because brain
Yeah.
injuries are so bizarre, and our brain is such an intricate, multi-dimensional
Mhm.
organ. So that's really fascinating to me. For me, I remembered my first past life before I even knew that that was like a concept that people had. This also happened to me. My first out of body experience was something that I didn't know people had out of body experiences. I saw and looked down and saw my chakras as my body. And that like freaked me out and sent me literally into like a tailspin. And I actually went back to my body because I lost control of
How old were
myself
you?
when I looked down and saw no body and was still able to move. And I was just so confused.
How old
And
were
I
you? How
didn't know
long ago
what
was this?
I didn't know what chakras were at the time, and I actually didn't learn what they were for another year or more at least by looking at a painting on someone's wall and going, "Oh my god, that's what I was. That's what I am. Like that's what I experienced." I didn't even know how to describe it, and then
Mhm.
I was like, "What is this?" And they're like, "I mean, it's the chakras." And I was like, "What are chakras?" Like I had no idea. And I mean, I always say I could go back to my journals and tell you an exact date, but in my mind, it's somewhere between the ages of like 14 and 16 that all of those things I just described happened. So yeah, I didn't even really know for sure that it was a past life memory or what it was. I knew it was a very different and profound feeling experience, and I knew that my experience was such that I felt like I was this other person, and I had felt that through the entire experience. And when I came back out of it, it was really both going into it and coming back out of it was very confusing because I was like, well, I'm Lindsay, but I was like this other person, but now I'm like Lindsay again. And like that was a long time ago. And like, what was that? I don't know what just happened. Um, and
Yeah.
if you want, I can share that specific past life experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it didn't connect a lot of dots for me for a little while, but much later on, it connected a lot of dots for me. But what happened was I was in um that liminal state. I believe, if I'm remembering this correctly, I was in that liminal state between sleeping and waking, and I slipped into this very, people ask me like, what was it like? And I'm like, well, it was exactly like sitting here talking with you right now. Like it felt no different from life. But I was someone, and I didn't even realize I wasn't someone else at first. I just like, I don't go around thinking I'm Lindsay, right? I go around just thinking like I'm doing this now. Whatever people call that level of consciousness, I was now this, but I didn't realize it was a different person yet, or a different time, or different anything. I just was, picking up a brush, and the brush was really interesting looking. It was like different. And so for a while, I had this awareness of both lives and like the difference between them. But then I was just in this life, and I could remember the life, and I just like you can remember your current life right now. It's not something you actively think about. It's just there. I was brushing my hair. I felt very scared all of a sudden because who was my husband in that life, Kate was coming up behind me, and I just felt really strange all of a sudden. I felt like something was really off. I knew also that this other person who I felt in love with, but was not my husband, was right outside the door and was about to maybe come in. And then my husband cut my neck, and that was very unexpected for me. And I felt betrayal, and I felt horror, and I felt all of this rush of information. Like, I should have left with this other person I was in love with. I should have not, honored my relationship with my husband, like whatever. And I understood he had found out about, even though I hadn't cheated on him yet, whatever. I knew everything. And I knew that that person in the hallway who loved me was also aware that I was being murdered at the moment and felt they could do nothing about it and left. And I felt a little betrayed at that too. And then I was dead. And then I came back to this body and I was like, that was a trip. Like, what was that? Like, again, I had no concept of past lives. I had no concept of anything. I just thought that was a really fucking crazy dream. Like,
Yeah.
it was so vivid. It was so real. It was more information than I've ever had in a dream. I've never even had a dream in which I'm not just me, and I was not me, but I was me, right? In this way I can't explain.
Have you ever done consciousness expanding, like hallucinogens or ayahuasca, DMT, any of that kind of stuff? Could you connect it to one of those kind of trips?
Are you asking me if I had at that point or if I have now?
That's a good question, actually. How
Well, both. I mean,
Yeah.
at that point, I had already done lots and lots of hallucinogens. So,
Okay.
and still now, that is also true. I've done even more since then. And so you're asking me if it is a similar type of experience?
Yeah.
It's no way similar because it's exactly like waking consciousnesses right now instead of altered consciousnesses.
Gotcha.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
they say people who were killed in a past life, they carry birthmarks or scars in areas where they might have been killed by. I don't suppose you have any that you can explain, right?
I have many health conditions that turn out to be related to past life traumas, not always murders, but past life traumas, and everybody has this. So sometimes birthmarks show the wound of a traumatic injury that happened, especially if it's in what we might call the most recent life before this one. With all of my work with past life since that first encounter, I've learned that there is no real linearity to it. What we might like that one may have no, that one actually wasn't. What we would call more linear in time, the one that was most recent in time space for me, is not my like most recent in consciousness.
Gotcha.
So however people want to try to understand that, that's my understanding of it. So whatever you might call your most recent past life in consciousness and some sort of linearity, then you might have these birthmarks that are associated with physical traumas of that life. I have found that 100% of people have either physical illnesses or diseases or birthmarks or emotional situations and mental situations that come from these past life traumas. And that's actually where we can do a lot of healing. And that's actually what I do with people.
That's wonderful. I didn't know that you actually do that. Now, let me kind of dovetail this into a similar thing. See, my mother's very spiritual. Unfortunately, she's still stuck in her religion. But she is a very spiritual person, and she kind of helped set me on a path that I've kind of forged out for myself. One of the things that my mom does is called generational healing, where you basically, for people who don't know what this is, because I know Lindsay does, you have someone help you. And what you do is you resolve past traumas in your DNA, because DNA passes down memories. If there was a rape in your family line, you might carry that trauma. And my mom works with people in France to help alleviate that. So let me ask you this question. It might be a little out there. You might be able to make a connection or not. But if we're dealing with past trauma through our DNA, right? But we also had a past life that might not be directly connected to this life. How does that work exactly? Because it seems like it could be both, no?
Well, it's definitely both. But what do you mean a past life that's not connected to this life?
Well, let's say there are some people that say I was your wife or I was your husband in a previous life. Like, that's a direct connection. But for example, let's say your past life was 2,000 or 3,000 years ago in Greece or Italy, where you don't really have a connection here, or maybe
You're
it's
saying
not.
like in my DNA right now, I don't have
Yes.
that past life.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. No, both things are true. So your genetic and your ancestral history can seem to some people, and they can experience such that it feels like a past life to them. There's not a whole lot of difference when you get up to the highest levels. To be quite honest, what I've done more and more as I work with people and on their own healing, I see there's all of these things going on at once. So we both have our own specific past lives, you might call it. Even that at the highest level isn't yours. My past life is your past life too, right? Your life right now is my life right now too. That's at the highest level of conception of consciousness. We're not at that level. That's not how we experience this place at this time. So in this place, if we are even able to experience past lives, they're very much ours. This is my past life. I lived that in this soul progression. Right. Well, that's a fractal iteration of source, right? So yes, you have that. You also have your DNA in your physical body right now that is carrying everybody who came before you, all of their information. And so you're also healing that and releasing that. That's also a fractal iteration of source. It's multi-dimensional, right? All of these different souls are coming into that and interacting in that way. So you might say, well, that's not my past life, but it's my ancestors' past life. They're both true. That's your ancestors' past life and not yours. And then again, at that higher level, not even the highest, but at a higher level, it is your past life too. There is no difference. So this is, we get to talk about it at whatever level we want to interact with it. But this is why you can also have, some people's ancestors come into the healing with them. Sometimes really specific ancestors show up when I'm doing a healing with somebody, and we can pinpoint exactly who it is. And at the same time, that's like another level of themselves. So people ask me sometimes, like, what if I want to believe that all of this is just me and my higher self working with myself to heal myself? And I'm like, that's true. That is true. That is what's going on. And if you want to look at it another way, that's your actual ancestor who lived an actual life, and they're here supporting you in this way. It's really up to you. And this is why I think for some people it can be confusing, and for other people it can be really freeing to understand those things. So I had a situation this past week, and this might be the post you're referring to actually on my Substack. And this is what I asked my guides and allies about. And then I channeled the message through that might be the message you're talking about when you brought up the, newsletter. And so in this experience, it was exactly like, I think I've had like 7 or 8 past life memories come up, all of them spontaneously. I don't personally go looking for my own experiences because I know my soul will just drop them in my lap right when I'm ready to deal with whatever the associated trauma or healing or message or lesson is. So I don't go looking, but this one was exactly like all the other past life memories I've had. I experienced this life as my own. I understood, many aspects of it, the memories of it, information that was beyond, our understanding supposedly. But it was a person, and I knew this in the moment, that was alive right now in 2023 as we're speaking. And so I came kind of back to our regular waking consciousness, and I was very confused. I was like, why did I have that experience? I feel like I'm spying, but I had that same feeling like that was me. I'm doing that right now, but
Would you
I'm
say
me
it's
right
kind of
now.
like, is it not really, but you could call it kind of like a remote viewing experience in a sense, can't you?
It would be if I were, because I remote view also, and it would be if I were my consciousness looking at that consciousness. I could still get all the same information. But no, I was that person. Very different point of view, very different experience. So I asked, again, my guides and allies, like, what the hell is happening now? What is this? And what is the point of it? And that message that came through that day, maybe you read it or maybe you didn't, but they were explaining essentially what I just shared, which I already had an understanding of, but I've never experienced it in this way like I did that day. And that is at the highest level, we are all each other, however people want to describe it, right? And I know that, and I've known that for years, but now I know it because I experienced it in my actual consciousness and body.
There's one thing to understand something, and there's another thing to manifest it physically and just really know it. Look, we know this in all the ancient historical texts, like in the Quran. They say if you kill a man, it's as if you've killed the whole world. the Lord is God, the Lord is one in the Bible. You know, what you've done for the least of me, you've also done for me. All that. It leads to that. People read it the wrong way, but it leads to the same thing: is that we are all one. We are
Yes.
all one, and we are all just. There is no difference between me and you. The only difference is a shift in consciousness, because at the top is everything.
Yeah.
It's everything, and the only way that the everything can be separate from the everything is to trick itself into thinking it's not itself and come down here and experience itself subjectively. But that's even an illusion.
Well, right. And then the, further, like, to think about this further, I in no way am going to pretend like right now I'm experiencing myself as you, even
Right.
though I conceptually understand that I am currently living your life too as you, but that's not my experience right now. And that's not where my consciousness is. So there's something, like you said, to knowing it, and then to like knowing it, like
Right.
experientially knowing it. And so I had that moment. It was a little bit closer to that higher level of consciousness of really knowing, like, yes, I am you and you are me, beyond just this, philosophical viewpoint. So I think it's really silly to some people want to adopt that and go, okay, yeah, I know that we're all one. So like I can go up to anybody and just like, I love you, man. You're me and I'm you, and no boundaries. And it's like, no, I mean, you do actually still inhabit this physical space, and there's linear time, and like these things actually exist. And to pretend your way out of it is not the way to do it, right? But to know it and to keep heading towards it more and more, I think is beautiful. And but I think people can do themselves a lot of damage when they want to, I guess, leap into these types of things and pretend their way into them. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I think the problem is basically is that this is not something that every single person has an understanding of,
or should even want to.
right?
I mean, I try to share with people, I'm like, it's not really that fun. Like I
Lindsay,
go through a lot.
what if we lived in a civilization where everybody knew that they were God, everybody knew that they were one, and then you can go around hug everyone like a
Yeah, like
that would
that'd
be
be
one
awesome.
thing. But this is not a life lesson that many people get to have or experience or really just be able to put down. It's not in some people's cards.
Well, and
Some
I'll
people,
say
yeah,
anybody can, but like when you choose this and you're intentional about it and you're asking, source to come through you more and more each day and whatnot, which is what I've been doing for how many decades now. And maybe I'm slower than some, maybe other people can do that and just instantly they're this clear channel. But for me, at least, and it seems to me like for everybody, you do that. And what actually happens then is source is like, well, okay, but you need to like get some of this junk out of the way. Like this channel is like hella dirty, actually. And the
right.
reason it's hella dirty is because of all those past life traumas that haven't been healed and your ancestral wounds that haven't been healed. And so when you do this, like people find and they don't always like it. They're like, Lindsay, why am I experiencing that? I'm like crying and I'm like in pain and I'm like this and that. And I'm like, this is part of it, honestly. And I'm not saying it's always horrible. It's balanced really well. Your soul knows how to help you along the path and like make sure you're not really having too much at one time. But sometimes it does feel like too much at one time. And sometimes it sucks. And people, I love that this meme has been going around more lately, or at least I've been seeing it more lately, where it's like what people think, awakening is. And it's like lights and butterflies and like,
And then it's
and then
like Lisa Simpson.
yeah, that is actually just this like kind of traumatic thing. And if you're not ready to process and release your trauma, then you shouldn't go looking to process and release. And this is why I said, like, I don't ask for past lives to come to me. I know they'll come exactly when I can handle, because 100% of them have been as traumatic as that one I said. And maybe it wasn't obvious when I was describing it, but when I came back to this body in life, I had to still deal with all the emotions of having my throat cut by my husband and bleeding out to death while the actual love of my life ran away. And that was hard. And it was especially hard because I can't go say to someone, dude, I just got my throat cut and died. And like, this is really hard for me and it hurts really bad. And I have all this emotion about it. I can't tell people that. I sound like a fucking crazy person. So I also then have to deal with it somewhat alone. Like now I'm very lucky. I have more people in my life who I can talk to about those things when they happen. But that's not easy either.
No, I could think of it kind of like a dream that you really remember. I do things to decalcify your pineal gland, by the way. So my dreams are very intense. And sometimes when you get ones that don't like and they really stick with you, and I'm a firm believer that in your dream, the individuals that you see their faces They're just archetypes. They represent certain things. They're not actually, if you see your sister, it's not actually your sister. It's a face to make you comfortable to see this. There's a lot more psychologically that's going into that. But do you think, for example, Jordan Peterson, and I quote this all the time, says that the pathway to hell, the pathway to enlightenment is necessitated through a pathway through hell. That's why there's not so many enlightened people.
Yeah.
Do you think that's the case? Do you have to have like I'm not going to say a breakdown or a meltdown, but do you have to have a complete shedding of your ego? Do you have to be completely stripped down, bare, and vulnerable to be able to build yourself back up spiritually?
I mean, in a way, yeah, like in this life, in this world, yes, because we've entered into these physical bodies on earth and they have nothing but trauma practically. You look back at our history and falling from the golden age into this Kali Yuga we're in is full of just trauma, trauma, trauma all the way. So how many people right now living have released any of that, right? And so, you know, I explain this to people like this, like you have a spiritual channel, it's there in 100% of people. And some people have clogged it up so much and add more and more trauma and more clogging, more and more dissociation and whatnot, until it practically seems to them like there is no God, there is no light, and there is no point to life. And that's like where a lot of people are. But if you're headed the other way, you're like, well, cool. But to get that source energy, that channel more and more connected, which is that's natural state, I have to get rid of the stuff that's clogging it up. And you can call it blockages, some people call it that, some people call it the darkness, some people call it like our demons, some people call it like who knows what, right? We all have some sort of conception of this, like our, you know, our auric field, I say, has some muddying in it, or some areas that are weak, you might say, all kinds of ways of describing it, but it's all the same thing. And that is to say, like, this is the stuff you've held and kept, and it has to go. In order for flow to come through, it has to have a place to flow. And if that stuff's in the way, like, it's not, right? So I do think you kind of like have to go through hell to get to that place of more enlightenment, but it's not because someone's like trying to torture you, or it's not even that someone's like trying to test you, which I think a lot of people think. For me, at least, it's not a test. And a lot of people also say, oh, it's the lesson you never learned. I don't think it's that either. I think your body, including your auric body, your astral body, however you want to conceive of that part of you, right? Your energy body, it knows how to take care of itself. And when you experienced that thing, you could not deal with it. Right? Just like you do with your physical body, like something happens and your body's like, we can't deal with this, so we're going to store it somewhere. Literally, this happens in your physical body. And then when you're healthy enough, when you have enough water and light and good foods and nutrition, it's like, okay, well, now we can pull this out. And you're like, oh my God, why do I feel like shit? Well, you're detoxing, right? Your body can finally deal with this thing that you couldn't deal with at the time. And it's exactly the same on every level, as above, so below, right? On your spiritual level, you're doing the exact same thing. Here's the shit. We call it trauma. We call it ancestral wounds. And it's the stuff you couldn't deal with at the time. But now you've given yourself enough space, enough time, enough whatever that you need and support and love, you know, to release it. And it sucks. So I don't think it's like, oh, people think of it this way, right? It's, oh, it's a punishment, it's a lesson, or it's like the test to make sure you really want it. And you can think of it all those ways. There's nothing wrong with that. But this is how I see it, is it's just a healing process.
Right. You know, it's interesting too, because a lot of people, they'll just get like I don't know, like a kidney stone, or a gallbladder will explode, or the appendix will do this, or something will happen inside your body, right? And they don't understand that there is a physiological, I'm trying to see how to word it basically. There's a reason, like each one of your organs is connected to something, right? And you can, based on how you do, and it's not as if like the government with like the fluoride in the water, and it's not like the fast food and all this stuff isn't trying to poison you and keep you at your lowest levels anyway. I say that's why, you know, you have the red and the yellow chakra at the bottom. That's why all the fast foods are red and yellow, because they keep you at that level.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I'm interested in the art of generational healing, because to be honest with you, my mother does it. I kind of understand it, but I don't understand the practice of it. Do you mind going into that a little bit?
Yeah, and I'll just say for anybody listening, and for you, Micah, that I was not taught by anyone to do any of the things I do. They all came to me through my own soul spiritual guidance, my guides and my allies. So I have no idea what other people do. Okay. So if if other people are like, that's not how you do it, I do this and that's not it, like, that's cool. I mean, if you pretend like there's one way to do something, I would think that's ridiculous anyway. So like, this is how I look at things and do things, and everything I've said today as well comes from my own conception. Not to say that I wasn't also informed along the way by things that I find in people who are massively intelligent and beautiful souls and whatnot, but just that this is sort of my what I was guided to, right? So for everything I do, and if you went and you looked right now at my services I offer, you're not going to find ancestral healing, and you're not going to find past life healing, right? But everything I do ends up involving past life and ancestral healing. And the reason why I don't offer very specific types of healing like that, or like Akashic record readings or whatnot, is because what I actually do is I provide a space and a time, and I use my spiritual gifts and skills to access whatever higher dimension you want to call it. And the way that it comes across to me is that your guides and allies and my guides and allies work together to do whatever you are actually ready for. And if I went forcing and said, oh, we're going to do ancestral healing today, that might be not what you actually need. And I'm not going to pretend like I know what you actually need. So this works best for me.
You put yourself in self-hypnosis like Edgar Casey used to when he read the Akashic records, or you do?
I would say that that's as similar as you could get to what I'm doing, but I, again, didn't go intentionally into trying to hypnotize myself when I'm doing this work, but I would say there's no difference. So I go into this space with people depending on what level of healing they've chosen. There's different amounts of time that we can give to it, and different levels of healing that come through. But like I said, I've very rarely worked with anyone out of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people I've worked with who hasn't had either a past life come up or an ancestral situation come up, and often both come up in one healing even. So I don't know, again, how other people do it. They do it intentionally. They're like, we're going to do this and here's how, and But for me, it's like, I go into a spiritual space and things just happen. My guides and allies and their guides and allies show me things, help release certain energy knots, it often looks like, or darknesses or fogs or densities or whatnot. And I just start to see the energy move and shift, and that person open up more to the healing that is coming through. And on the spiritual level, through my spiritual eye, that's how it kind of goes. And then when we come back out of that space, I'm able to share with them the messages that come through, the types of healing that I saw happen, the ancestral lines that I saw and what they were. One of the really cool ones I did actually was someone's past life and their ancestry. So that happens too, right? You have a past life that is also in your genetic lineage. And this person, we were able to actually see their coat of arms. I saw like this symbol above them. I was like, I don't know, you looked like you were sort of a regal, perhaps even like a king, but at least like the lord of this area. And this was your symbol that was above your head. And it had like 4 squares, and it had a lion in one and a this and the other. And it had these colors. I'm not a historian enough to have known that, but we went looking afterwards, and that was a real person, and that was their real coat of arms. And that was actually, that person later found out, one of their ancestors. So the things that come through can be amazing. And I mean, again, I don't go into it trying to get any details or information. And so a lot of times they're not things that we can go back and confirm like that, but sometimes they are. And that can be really cool for people. But either way, people tend to experience an actual shift in their life afterwards. And that's what actually matters. So a lot of times people go to various healers and things, and they just continue to experience the same problems and blockages, which is a sign that like the energy didn't actually shift. And it's not always the healer or whatever. It might have been that you weren't ready and you were trying to force something that wasn't ready, right? But you know when you have actually accomplished something, when you actually shift. And sometimes that looks like, oh, my relationships suddenly were different, or my job suddenly just the problem sort of went away, or I was just more able to deal with that, or my physical body healed something, or I spent the next 3 days crying, right? Like, and so it could be all these different things, and some of them feel really good and some of them feel really bad. But after the bad, even, you also usually feel a lot better. and clearer and brighter. And those are the words I hear most often. I felt clearer, I felt brighter. And I'm like,
Amazing.
mission accomplished,
Now,
right? That's the whole goal.
have you ever gone into a problem where the lady was like, this happened in my lineage. I know this is why I'm having trouble with men. My great grandmother was raped or something. I need you to help me. Do people ever come to you with the problem and you're like, all right, let's see what we can do?
Yeah, almost always people have a specific problem that drove them to me, and they want to do something specific about it. And I always say the same thing. I hope so. And it's like with tarot readings, with sound healings, with, the deeper healing ceremonies, all of these levels, I would say it's probably 95% of the time the thing you came for is exactly what ends up being worked on, whether you tell me the thing or not. Like, I tell people too, like, you can tell me about your problem or whatever it is, or you don't have, it doesn't matter to me. I'm going to go into this space and do the exact same thing either way. So it's up to you, right? And so 95% of the time it ends up being exactly what they wanted, what they came for, what they were hoping to. But sometime, because you do usually know, we do have a wisdom about us. Like, we know what we're ready for and what needs to be healed now. And right. But sometimes no. Sometimes we're like, oh, why won't this thing work out? Or this relationship with so-and-so. And your guides are like, actually, you really need to like pay attention over here. This is a much bigger problem. And we're just in denial or, so sometimes that happens and it's not very common, but it does. And so that's part of why I also do it the way I do, where I'm like, I'm not going to force anything. I'm just going to go in and see what takes place.
That's part of the reason why I like marijuana so much, to be honest with you. I don't drink. I haven't drank in 2.5 years. I think alcohol is terrible.
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell people what to do, but I'm telling people, if you want to ascend, you need to quit alcohol. You need to quit things like masturbation, because that just keeps you in your lower chakras. I go into all this stuff, but I find it interesting that, well, actually, let's go with this. Have you ever come across, do you also do Reiki, where you could find spiritual blockages? You don't do that?
I mean, I find spiritual blockages and release them, but I've never learned Reiki and I don't know it. Okay.
Gotcha.
When I said I don't do anything that I was taught by anyone, I mean it. Like, there is no tradition or style that I've ever learned. So,
Lindsey, the most interesting and the people who are the brightest at things are not confined to an educational system with a glass ceiling.
I think that's why my soul did it this way. And I resisted it the whole time. I was like, I'm not doing that. And it was like, oh, yes, you are. And you're going to do it like this. Eventually caved. So here I am.
I think that the most brilliant people throughout history, it's been shown, are kind of like the Bobby Fishers that come out of absolutely nowhere in the Midwest, that just randomly just self-taught.
Yeah.
And that's the best way to go, because you're not in a box. You're not in the box at that point.
And that's why people are like, oh, you can't do a tarot reading for a past life. And I'm like, well, I do. So apparently you can. No one told me I couldn't, and I started doing it, and so I can. And now people tell me I can. I'm like, well, I already did it. So that's what I do. But I think it's true, when we're limited in those ways, we're really indoctrinated. And there's nothing wrong. I don't want to scare people off of like learning Reiki or, because I think all of these things open your eyes and open your mind, and you start to explore things. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I do think at some point it is best to then go beyond what you were taught and try different things. And what I always say is, who do you think the first person who did Reiki was? Was it named Reiki then? And someone just did it. And that's how it came about. And that means it just exists in the universe. Yes. And so does everything else. So you could do whatever you want.
Yeah. They say nothing's new under the sun. That's part of the reason why I love marijuana so much, to be honest with you, as I was trying to say before, but I lost my train of thought for a sec. Part of the reason I love it so much is because when you're on it, you can't hide from yourself. Like, all your flaws and all your positivities and everything, they're right there. Like, you can trick yourself when you're conscious and sober to put up walls to hide yourself from your imperfections. But all that stuff is right there when you're on marijuana.
Like any good hallucinogen, which marijuana is.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you use, to connect to source? That's why a lot of people try DMT or this, because they want to feel God. They want to understand it. They want to be one. They want to lose their ego. At your stage in the game, why do you do it?
I don't use any substances anymore. I very specifically quit all hallucinogens a long time ago. And if I really needed to, I would use them. Like, I love them. They're amazing. Mm-hmm. Mescaline was amazing, and marijuana was amazing. LSD was amazing. Psilocybin's amazing. Like everything I've ever done has been great. It's a great tool. It definitely can open you up to various things and help you understand what's actually going on here and what you actually are and who you actually are. And I don't use them anymore because it's like too much. Like I'm already constantly inundated with energy and information and things, and I have to work to turn it off.
Right.
And have a break for myself and like still live normal life. And so I don't do them anymore because of that reason. I don't need to. And I'm not saying other people like need to or judging them. I'm saying like I did a plenty of all of those things, and I just now it's not appropriate for me anymore. So it's a tool in the tool bag. I can pull it out if I want to, but no, every day when I'm doing this work with people, I don't use any substances. I just can turn it on more deeply and go into that state, like you said, probably similar to a type of hypnosis, where you just move into a different sort of brainwave state, to get more deeply into it. But even that is technically not necessary. Like as I'm walking around through the day, things are coming through. So, but it helps. It helps to go into those states to be more deeply aligned. And I tell people, even on the most basic level, when you close your eyes, your attention begins to come within, right? And your attention is inside of you, and you just sit with your breath and watch it fill your belly and go back out again. You're already going into a like more hypnotic, slightly different brainwave state. And this is why people meditate and practice those things, is to get more and more used to that. Cause we're like attention out here all the time, right? Our attention's on, my attention's on you right now. My attention's on whatever, all day, every day, our attention is outside of ourselves. But if you just do this 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, 20, whatever you want to do a day, just that, people have this focus on like, oh, I need to do this type of meditation and I need to like study with a master and I need to, those things are all cool, but you can also just chill, close your eyes and just sit with your breath. This is like one of the best meditations. This is, people can reach enlightenment from that simple meditation, right?
I tell people to get a non-scented candle and just watch the fire for like half an hour a day.
That's a good one.
That's what I tell people to do. So
it'll talk to you. You can't stop it from talking to you.
It's just opening things up. So, okay. So what I want to do is I want to shift over to talk to you about Rogue Ways. I want to talk about your show because you had me on about 2 years ago when I first started doing my astrotheology. And I really enjoyed your show. I thought you're very intelligent. And I want to know, why did you start Rogue Ways? And I wanted to know where you plan on going with it. And because I see you doing all sorts of stuff and you're part of the truth teller community and all that, I want to know, because I'm very spiritual as well too, but I'm also very big into the truth telling community. So what is it about us? Is it just like the need to just make things better around us? Like why do people like us start podcasts or do things like this? So I was just wondering.
Yeah, it is interesting that spirituality almost always comes out of the sort of truth and awareness and conspiracy types of communities. And I think it's for the same reason, right? Because the spiritual reality is the truth. So the further you go in any direction of the truth, the more you will come to that conclusion. It can be wrapped in any religion or tradition you want, or it doesn't have to be wrapped in any of them, but you just can't deny it eventually. And our regular society, which is the one that's lying to us constantly and conditioning us into things that are very unhealthy, would like to disconnect you from that. And they specifically try to contort it as much as possible and trap you in different boxes with it, with the natural inclination you have towards that truth of spiritual presence within yourself, or they try to cut it off completely and say it doesn't even exist. And both of those are traps that they've set for us along the way. So as we start to think about the truth and all these things more and more, we can't deny that aspect. I've always been, obviously, from a young age, having these deeply spiritual, profound experiences and realizations. And I've been on this path of guiding me towards doing the work I do one-on-one with people spiritually for that whole time. But I never would have thought that I was ever going to do a show. And I tell people, they're like, oh, you're so like good at talking to people or this or that. And I'm like, well, I'm actually an introvert. Like, this is not my natural state. I don't want to talk to anyone. If you left me to my own devices, I would probably never hang out with anyone or talk to anybody almost ever. I'm very happy with a book, taking notes, doing my own thing, like meditating, all this stuff alone is my preferred state. So none of this is what I would have wanted for myself. Just like I said, my guides and allies sort of like pushed me into the healing work I do too. I feel sort of pushed into this role. And I love it. I'm not saying in any way I don't love it. I love it very much. I've got to meet amazing people who I get to learn from and like yourself and connect with. And it's just very, very, very cool and fun. But I wouldn't have done it. But I just found myself in a situation where the group of people around me was literally like begging me to do a show where they could come on and we could all talk about these things we were talking about. And so I did. And I just literally was looking at it as a service to them. I was like, I have the camera and the mic and the whatever, and I understand how to live stream and how to, or not live stream and even just record or whatever, and whatever we want to do. And so, sure, let's do it. It's fun. And so I actually started to do it with that. It was an old show I did where we got together. We talked about a different show that we all loved and the topics that would come up in it. And eventually I was like, well, why am I just doing this one person's show? Why don't I also do all of the things I'm fascinated with that don't get necessarily touched on or whatever? And these same people who are already coming and talking, we can all talk about this stuff. Like, we're all smart people. So part of it was I wanted to empower all the people around me to realize how intelligent they were, that they don't need, we perceive like people who do shows as like, having achieved something different than us, or they're at a different level, or they understand more. And it's like, no, we're actually all just people, and we are actually all very intelligent too. We have our own wisdom. So I loved that aspect of it. But I also, like I said, wanted to talk about some of the things that I find really important. And one of those things is healing and spirituality. And that specific show didn't really touch on those things almost ever. So then I got to really dive into that more as well. So it was kind of, like I said, pushed upon me. These people, literally begged me to do it. And I did. But eventually it became like, well, this is a really cool outlet for the things that I find important. I'm also a teacher by trade and profession. And for a long time I had been teaching in schools. And I actually started this while I was still teaching in schools. And, that's a natural sort of drive of mine, too, is to help people educate themselves. And the way I do that is through presenting questions and information for people to dive into without telling them what I think the answers are. Mm-hmm. So my show is a little bit different, too, for people, because I don't generally say, this is the truth, this is the final answer, this is the thing. Instead, I'm asking the guest what their perspective on it is, which is often very different from mine. But I don't present that necessarily when I'm talking to a guest, because it's not really the point of that show, right? This is a show for people to engage with and take their own conclusions from. When I'm presenting my own information, I do the same. And you've heard me do it here with you. This is my perspective. This is my experience. And this is my understanding. By no means would I limit anybody else's experience or understanding to that thing. So that's one of my joys, too, in doing this, is helping people develop their own takes and views and understandings of various different aspects of being human in this very interesting Kali Yuga that we are in.
I like the idea that with our YouTube channel and or our other channels that we have on our podcast, it's sort of like a living diary. Like, if we were to exit the planet and somebody wanted to get to know us, they could just watch what we talk about and how we perceive things, and they can get a really good idea. You know what I mean? It's like a living diary, the way I see it.
It is that too. Yeah, it's very personal. And some people even say to me or ask me sometimes, like, why do you share so much really personal information? And I'm like, because I'm a teacher. And I've been doing this with kids for my whole life, and not necessarily in the way that I do it now. Like, I wouldn't have ever told my students very intimate details of my life or my personality, but being vulnerable in various ways with kids also, and in this way now more directly with what's actually going on in my life, is what helps other people to grow themselves. So when I share something, it's very intentional, and I don't share everything, but the things I do share are meant to show people a specific lens into another way of looking at something that, especially most often, it's because I don't think they get it very often. So I'm like, well, here's an example. Here's my own lived experience of this thing that I hope will lend you some understanding or insight when you encounter similar things in your life, if that's helpful for you. Or, it might even be helpful for people to look at that and go, none of that works for me. None of that is true. I think that's stupid. Cool. You still solidified your own understanding of what you're doing in life. And that's really the goal. So you said earlier, do you have to become vulnerable to become enlightened, and in a way, yes. And also, I think you have to become vulnerable to really, truly reach people where they're at and help them get to their next step.
Fantastic. So I know that you do this like four horsemen kind of thing with Charlie Robinson from Macroaggressions. I think it's X Cubed 420, who I've actually never spoke to.
Yeah.
And I think it's Chris Matthew from Forbidden Knowledge, right?
Well, the four people who do it regularly are Corey Hughes and then X Cubed 420 and Charlie Robinson and myself. But it is actually Chris Matthews from Forbidden Knowledge News's baby. He just lost the time to be able to do it, so we kind of took it over. So he still shows up from time to time, and then it becomes the five horsemen. But yeah, otherwise every week it's the four of us.
So what do you do when you guys get together? Because I'm going to try and have all of you guys on this channel so that you guys watching can really get to know these brilliant minds that I've met along the way. I always tell them that nobody's done more podcasts than I have in the last 3 years.
Yeah, you have.
The podcast. But yeah, so what do you guys go in with like an agenda when you guys get together? Or you just talk about the current thing, or?
The show started with everybody would bring one or two of their favorite news items or current happenings from the week, and it then kind of like evolved or devolved into we just talk about whatever we feel like comes up. So it is current events sort of focused. But sometimes we end up, I think there was a whole episode not that long ago where I wasn't there for this one, but they just talked about like their guns and what guns are good and stuff. So it can also just be whatever we randomly feel like doing at the time. But that is the intention, that we kind of pull up the most ridiculous things that are being orchestrated right now in order to try to condition us and push us in certain directions in society, and sort of unmask them, make fun of them, and remember that all of that is total bullshit.
It's all total propaganda. Yeah. They take things and then they invert it slightly and then they pervert it. And I mean, it's 1984. I mean, it's so cliche to say that, but like the Ministry of Truth, the Ministry of Lies, that whole thing, that's basically how everything goes.
It is.
And I do talk a lot about that. I actually just posted a video like 20 minutes before you came on about why they took out Gaddafi. People have no idea. People have no idea about this stuff. And I just try and touch on all these topics that they don't know. I think earlier today I did the Jekyll Island Federal Reserve. Like there's just so much stuff out there. How do people who watch this, how do they get into that mindset? Like, how do you start going down a rabbit hole? Because at some point there was one story that you followed and it linked to something else, and then you just fell down a rabbit hole. So what is there like a website that people can start at? Is there a certain video? I know what you're going to say, but I'm going to say, if you were to tell people who are just starting to wake up how to follow their path and how to follow the trail of breadcrumbs and the information, what would you say to them?
I would say it's like everything else, 100% internal, actually, and there is no external place to go looking. But what you will always need to do is encounter everything that is appearing in front of you in this waking reality and in the dream reality with the question, what actually is this? What is it doing? What is it trying to do? What am I wanting out of this, if anything? And what might be misleading about it, or why would somebody possibly like twist this or contort this? Like, ask questions, and that's about it. If you ask questions, it doesn't matter what you ever encounter, you will always end up going a better way, at least. And so that's what it comes down to, is people have asked me things like this in various times and ways too, like, well, how did you learn, or what did you start with? And I'm like, I mean, I started with my father telling me that the Vietnam War was complete bullshit and that all the bad things that happened to him as a soldier there, and that we should never trust the government. That was when I was like 5 years old. And they're like, no. I mean, what woke you up? I'm like, that did wake me up. For the rest of my life, I was able to go, whoa, and if someone's in a position of authority, what is it they actually want from me? And are they doing anything for me? And if so, what about it is good? And what might be misleading? What might be inappropriate? What might rob me of my own actual ability to think and do on my own? Right. And I went through the rest of life like that. So that is what woke me up. Right. So I just think it's that. I think it's that attitude, that way of looking at things, and that you should do it with 100% of things, including whatever you hear and see me say and do, and whatever you hear Micah say and do, especially as we move into like, someone could create this whole podcast without either of us even knowing. Right. So then what? Are you going to trust me? Don't trust this face. Don't trust this voice. That can be created outside of me. So you have to be able to trust yourself internally, and you have to be able to ask yourself questions internally. And that is really the only way to go.
Wonderful. I like that.
Mhm.
Now, are there any topics that you haven't gotten to on your show yet that you're like, I really need to, I really want to talk about this?
I don't think so. I don't want to like be wrong about that, and I'm sure everybody has blind spots, but this is like year 5 now, and I'm over just with Rogue Ways, I'm over 500 episodes. With Middle Path, I think I'm at like 100, and then before either of those shows I did other shows, and so I don't think there's anything I haven't touched on. But there's definitely things my audience hasn't heard me touch on because audiences shift over time, right? And,
Right.
overall there's growth and there's some people who stay the whole time, but a lot of people come, a lot of people go. And so people will come, and I get this sometimes. They're like, why have you never covered like Pizzagate or child sacrifice? And I'm like, oh, I've covered it like 55 times. Like I can't do it every episode. And
Yeah.
sometimes it doesn't feel relevant for a long time, but I do go back to things over and over again, especially because our perspective changes, right? And you've seen this with yourself over how many years you've been doing shows. Like you start to grow and see things slightly differently too.
Oh,
And
100%.
right, just in a deeper, a widening or whatever, it just is a little bit different, even if it's the same sort of general bent.
I think
So
that if you're not evolving as a person and you're not maybe you don't have to change your mind for everything.
right.
But if you're the same exact person as you were 20 years ago, like you're missing the point of life.
Yeah, we're
You know,
supposed to grow.
we're supposed to grow constantly. In fact, I'm glad that I started my podcast when I was already spiritually coherent
Mm.
because I could imagine being like an 18-year-old, not knowing anything, like with I haven't had my Saturn return yet. And, you're thinking about all that kind of nonsense that's going on. It's good to hit a certain level. So that's great. Now, have you been shadow banned or have you been kicked off any platform yet?
Yeah, I was kicked off YouTube finally, like, I don't remember when, but I want to say like 5 months ago or something, but I can't really remember. I was already shadow banned on YouTube, and it was really obvious even from day one. Before anything, before I even had Rogue Ways, people would message me and be like, "I have to resubscribe to your channel every single time I look for you, and I can't hardly find you." Well, awesome. I actually was, you might not call it shadow ban, but whatever people want to call it, targeted or something, before I ever started doing any shows. It was probably 2004 that I first knew my phone was tapped, because I used to do a lot of political work in the streets of Seattle. And so I've been on various radars my entire life. So when I started doing this, I was already noted to begin with before I ever got big. So a lot of other people who don't have that experience might start a show and see a lot of organic growth until they get to a certain point, and then they start noticing like, oh
Yeah,
my God, like now things are different. Mine from the very beginning was already suppressed.
right.
So that's
It's
all
like,
I've ever experienced.
well, we also know from the very recent revelation, even though we knew this a long time ago, we tell people this a long time ago, but we know now that the government had access to people's DMs, on Twitter. And I mean, it seems like for a long time it was just Alex Jones doing this kind of stuff. And then it just kind of seemed like it exploded. And now everybody's talking about this. And whether you like Elon Musk or not, whether you think the Neuralink thing, I mean, he's still got a lot of red flags, but the way he's presenting himself right now is much more palatable to an open and free market of discussions and ideas and such. We'll see if that keeps. But yeah, no. So damn. I mean, I think we pretty much covered everything.
We
Do
nailed
you?
it.
We did. So if people wanted to get specific readings from you or tune into you, where can they find all your stuff?
I suggest searching for Rogue Ways in quotation marks, because most searches still have at least that aspect of Boolean searching, and it helps find my show instead of a bunch of other nonsense. So Rogue Ways, as in pathways, not waves of the ocean. And search that on any podcast app. You'll find the show on Rockfin is where I do most of my video. I have videos on Rumble and other places, but I do my live streams and my exclusives on Rockfin. So people can go there for that. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Apotropaic Soul, and you can find me on Facebook under Lindsey Scharmyn. I have a lot of stuff on my site, all of the things I just listed and more on rogueways.org. You can schedule with me there under the spiritual services tab or the shamanic soul services button. They both link to my Calendly, where you can just pick a service and schedule it. You can, of course, contact me. There's a contact page there if you want to ask me what I think would be best for you, and I can tap into some guidance to see what might be best. Sometimes a tarot reading is what's best. It's a really easy way to dive in. And I always tell people, you've never had, even if you've had tarot readings, you've very likely never had a tarot reading like mine, because it isn't just consulting some cards to get some information. There's healing energy coming through the whole way, and people will often cry or have other emotional shifts, or and people will always go, I don't know why I'm doing this. And I'm like, well, because you're in a spiritual healing right now. Like, it's a tarot reading, but it's actually a spiritual healing. Right. So not only do you get answers and information, but you also receive. There's nothing that I do where you don't receive spiritual healing. And that is the field that I set up for you when we talk and communicate with each other. And I do 100% of it distance. I don't even have a space to do it physically in person if I wanted to. And I don't want to. So it's all distance. And some people really, really don't like that. And I'd say that I'm probably not the healer for you. So that's great. But you want to go find someone else. And other people, the people who I work with have seen there's no difference. There's no watering down. And it's very profoundly spiritually supportive and helpful. So there's lots of different things. And you can just look through all the offerings and pick the one that works for you and book it right then and there. And then we'll meet. So it's pretty cool. I'm very honored, and I'm flattered that the universe chose me to do this. Honestly, I used to be resistant and angry and petulant and resentful, and now I'm just deeply honored and very grateful.
That's amazing. Lindsey, thank you so much. I'm going to put this up right away. I'll send you a link. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for enlightening me, enlightening us. You have a beautiful mind. You're a beautiful soul, and I will talk to you soon.
I appreciate it, Micah. Thank you.
Take care.